The massive ships appeared without warning, their crystal surfaces catching starlight like frozen tears against the black void of space. They hung motionless above Earth, silent and beautiful and terrifying. Inside the largest vessel, Fleet Commander, Nixara pressed her clawed hands against the observation deck's smooth surface, watching the blue-green world turn slowly beneath them. "What a mess," she muttered, her voice carrying the musical tones of her species. The orbital scans painted a clear picture on her screens, thousands of different languages, hundreds of separate nations, primitive rockets that barely reached their own moon. It was exactly what she expected from another backward planet. "Commander," Lieutenant Velthon approached, his 4 golden eyes blinking one after another. "We have finished analyzing their communication signals." Nixara turned, her crystalline armor catching the ship's soft light. "And?" "They broadcast constantly, millions of signals every second. Most appear to be entertainment programs about reproduction and territory disputes. They also share images of food and small animals extensively." The commander's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among her kind. "Food pictures? How wonderfully primitive. Any signs of real intelligence?" "Some scientific communications, but nothing advanced. Their mathematics are crude. Their technology is laughable. They still burn fossil fuels and fight wars with metal projectiles." Nixara nodded, already losing interest. In her 300 years of service, she had seen dozens of worlds like this, young species that spent more time fighting each other than reaching for the stars. They rarely lasted long enough to become interesting. "Begin standard resource extraction," she ordered. "Focus on their moon first. The gravity is lower, and they barely visit it. We can strip mine the entire satellite before they even realize. We're here. What about first contact protocols, and why waste time? Look at them." She gestured at the screen showing Earth's chaotic surface. "Wars everywhere. Pollution choking their atmosphere. They can't even agree on basic facts about their own planet's climate. These primitives will destroy themselves within a few decades, anyway." Far below on Earth's surface, in a cluttered laboratory in Seoul, Dr. Kim Do-yun rubbed his tired eyes and stared at his computer screen for the 100th time that day. The radio telescope data showed patterns that made no sense. For 3 days straight, strange signals had been flooding in from deep space. His colleagues at the university had dismissed them as solar flares or equipment malfunctions, but Do-hyun saw something different. The signals had structure, rhythm, purpose. Professor Kim, his research assistant Park Hyena, called from across the room. "The coffee machine is broken again." "Never mind the coffee," Do-hyun said, waving her over. "Look at this." He pointed at the waveforms dancing across his monitor. "See these repeating sequences? They're not random. Someone is sending them." Hyena leaned closer, her long hair falling across her face as she studied the data. "But the frequency patterns are impossible. No human technology could generate signals this complex." "Exactly." Do-hyun's heart raced with excitement and terror. "Because they're not from humans." Above them, invisible to Earth's primitive sensors, the Catalian mining ships began their slow descent toward the moon. Their quantum drills could tear through solid rock like tissue paper. Their cargo holds could swallow mountains. In a few months, they would reduce Earth's satellite to a hollow shell, harvesting every valuable mineral and rare element. The humans would never know what hit them. Nixara watched the operation begin with satisfaction. Another routine mission on another forgettable world. Her ships would take what they needed, and the primitive inhabitants would continue their petty squabbles until their species inevitably collapsed. She had seen it countless times before. But in his small laboratory, Do-hyun was not giving up. He had spent his entire career studying how different cultures communicated. He understood that language was more than just words. It was pattern and meaning and intent all woven together. These signals from space had all three. "Hyena, he said, using the familiar form of her name. "Run this through the linguistic analysis program again. But this time, treat it like music, instead of mathematics." "Music?" "Communication doesn't always follow logical rules. Sometimes it follows emotional ones. Art, beauty, rhythm. He adjusted the program settings with shaking fingers. If someone out there is trying to talk to us, maybe they're not speaking in equations. Maybe they're speaking in something more universal. The program churned through terabytes of data, searching for patterns within patterns. Hyena brought them both cold tea and stale rice crackers while they waited. Outside their window, Sol's neon lights painted the night sky in brilliant colors, hiding the stars where humanity's first visitors waited in judgment. Neither the aliens above nor the humans below could imagine how much their two worlds were about to change. The Catalians saw only primitives unworthy of consideration. Do-hyun saw only the greatest mystery of his lifetime, waiting to be solved. Both sides were about to discover they were wrong. The world had gone completely crazy in just 3 days. Every news channel screamed about the alien ships hanging in space above Earth. Military jets scrambled uselessly through the sky. World leaders held emergency meetings that accomplished nothing. Panic spread through cities like wildfire as people emptied stores and filled their cars with gas, preparing for the end of everything. But in his small Seoul laboratory, Dr. Kim Do-hyun ignored all the chaos outside. He had not slept for 72 hours. Empty coffee cups covered his desk like a small city of ceramic towers. His eyes burned from staring at computer screens, but he could not stop, not when he was so close to understanding. The alien language was unlike anything he had ever seen. It used mathematics as its foundation, but wrapped around it were layers of meaning that felt almost like music. Each symbol carried emotional weight. Each sequence told a story. It was beautiful and complex and completely inhuman. "Professor," Hyena said softly from her corner desk, "you need to sleep. The government people have been calling all day. They want you to share your research." "Not yet," Do-hyun muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm missing something important. The way they structure their sentences, it's not just about information, it's about status, hierarchy. They're telling us exactly what they think of us." He had been working on a single message for hours, something simple but meaningful. Something that would show the aliens that humans were worth talking to. The problem was that their language seemed designed to put everything in its proper place. Superior beings spoke down to inferior ones. There was no way to communicate as equals, unless he found a different approach. "Got it," he whispered suddenly, his hands shaking with exhaustion and excitement. He typed the final sequence of mathematical symbols and pressed send before he could change his mind. The message was simple. Human seeks understanding. No violence. Only words. He had structured it carefully, using the alien grammar rules he had discovered, but instead of trying to claim equality, he had written it from a position of curiosity, like a student asking a teacher for knowledge. It went against every diplomatic instinct, but Do-hyun understood something about communication that politicians did not. Sometimes you had to start where the other person expected you to be. The response came faster than he had dared to hope. His computer speakers crackled to life with a voice unlike anything Earth had ever heard. It was musical and flowing, like wind chimes made of crystal, but the words themselves made his heart sink. Amusing. The talking animal wishes to converse. We grant this entertainment. Hyena looked up from her own computer, her face pale with worry. "Professor, are you sure about this? They're treating us like pets." Do-hyun leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of exhaustion. Outside his window, Seoul continued its normal life. People walked down sidewalks. Cars moved through traffic. Children played in parks. None of them knew that their entire species had just been dismissed as talking animals by beings from the stars. "That's exactly why it has to be me," he said quietly, already knowing what he had to do. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. He thought about his grandmother, who had survived the Korean War by pretending to be simple and harmless while secretly helping refugees escape. He thought about his students, who often surprised him with their insights when he stopped trying to impress them with his knowledge. He thought about every time in history when the underdog had won by being exactly what their opponents expected them to be. "They think we're just clever animals," he continued, warming to the idea. So let's be clever animals. Let's show them what that really means. Hyena shook her head. The government will never approve this. They want military advisors and diplomats, important people with impressive titles. The government doesn't even know I exist yet, Do-hyun replied with a tired smile. By the time they figure out what's happening, maybe I'll have already opened a door. He began typing a response, choosing his words with the care of a surgeon. He could not claim to represent Earth or humanity. He could not make demands or threats. He could only be exactly what they expected, a curious creature looking up at his betters and asking questions. But Do-hyun had spent his entire career studying how different cultures communicated. He knew that the most powerful conversations often began with the simplest questions. He knew that sometimes the best way to change someone's mind was to let them think they were teaching you. What should I tell them when they ask who you are? Hyena asked. Do-hyun paused in his typing, considering the question. Outside, fighter jets screamed across the sky in formation, preparing for a war they could not possibly win. Inside government buildings, important people made important plans that would accomplish nothing. The aliens had dismissed humanity as animals, and every human response so far had proved them right. Tell them I'm nobody special, he said finally. Just a teacher who wants to learn. He pressed send on his message, knowing that he was about to become either humanity's greatest hero or its most spectacular failure. In the darkness of space above, alien minds would soon be deciding the fate of every person on Earth. But sometimes nobody special was exactly what the world needed. The transport beam deposited Do-hyun in a chamber that made his head spin. Everything was perfect angles and gleaming surfaces. The walls curved in mathematical spirals that seemed to go on forever. The floor beneath his feet felt like walking on mirrors. Even the air tasted clean and processed, like it had been scrubbed of every impurity. 5 alien beings sat before him on chairs that looked more like crystalline thrones. Their bodies were tall and graceful, covered in what appeared to be living armor that shifted colors with their emotions. Their faces were beautiful in an inhuman way, with large eyes that held no warmth and features that seemed carved from precious stone. Do-hyun felt very small and very human in this place of perfect order. So, said the center figure, its voice flowing through a translation device that made everything sound cold and clinical. The primitive wishes to speak. I am Supreme Analyst Kriegsvel, the alien continued. These are my fellow researchers. We study inferior species before they destroy themselves. You have been granted this audience because your communications were mildly entertaining. Do-hyun bowed slightly, remembering his grandmother's lessons about showing respect even to those who did not deserve it. Thank you for seeing me. You claim intelligence. Kriegsvel clicked, leaning forward with something like curiosity. Yet your species wages constant war. You pollute your own habitat. You waste enormous resources on frivolous pursuits like art and music and games. Explain this contradiction. The other aliens murmured agreement. One of them activated a holographic display showing Earth's surface. Wars flashed red across continents. Pollution clouds swirled over cities. The data painted humanity as a species bent on destroying itself. Do-hyun had prepared for this moment during the long journey to their ship. He had thought about what arguments might work, what facts might impress them. But looking at these perfect beings in their perfect chamber, he realized that facts would not be enough. Let me tell you about Lee Min-ho, he began quietly. The aliens exchanged glances. This was clearly not the response they had expected. Min-ho was a teacher in my city, Do-hyun continued. He taught second grade, 7-year-old children. He had been teaching for 15 years when the fire started. He could see the aliens growing restless, but he pressed on. The building was old. The fire spread quickly. Min-ho could have run out immediately and saved himself. The exit was right there, but instead, he went back into the burning building. 7 times. Each time he carried out 2 children. On the 7th trip, the ceiling collapsed. He died saving the last child. Inefficient, Kuxvel stated flatly. One adult's survival probability versus multiple offspring. The mathematics are clear, but why risk himself for genetic material that was not his own? You're missing the point, Do-hyun said gently, his voice carrying none of the anger he felt. Minho had no children of his own. He was not married. These were not his offspring. They were just human children. He saved them because that's what humans do. The chamber fell silent. The aliens stared at him with expressions he could not read. Let me tell you about Choi Nara, Do-hyun continued. She was a nurse. She worked in war zones, places where your scans probably show the worst of human behavior. She could have worked in safe hospitals, earned more money, lived a comfortable life. Instead, she chose to help wounded soldiers and civilians in the most dangerous places on Earth. Why? Asked another alien, its voice betraying genuine confusion. Because they needed help, Do-hyun replied simply. Because she could help them. Because leaving them to die alone was not something she could accept. He told them about Shin Junho, a violinist who played concerts in bombed-out hospitals to help patients heal. About Kim Sora, a teacher who spent her own money to buy supplies for poor students. About Park Woo-bin, a firefighter who adopted 3 children orphaned in the disaster that killed their parents. With each story, the aliens grew quieter. Their perfect faces showed something Do-hyun had not expected to see. Uncertainty. These actions serve no logical purpose, Kuxvel said finally, but its voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. They do not advance your species' survival. They do not improve your technology or expand your territory. No, Do-hyun agreed. They don't. But they make us human. We do not understand, admitted the alien to Kuxvel's left. Your species fights wars, yet individuals sacrifice themselves for strangers. You pollute your environment, yet others dedicate their lives to protecting it. You waste resources on art, yet this art somehow makes your people stronger. How do you explain these contradictions? Do-hyun smiled, thinking of his grandmother again. She had always said that the most important truths were the hardest to explain. Maybe, he said carefully, the contradictions are not flaws. Maybe they are the point. Maybe being human means holding 2 opposite things in your heart at the same time, and somehow making them both true. The aliens sat in perfect silence, their crystalline armor shifting colors as they processed this impossible idea. In their world of logic and order, contradiction was error. But this small human standing before them was suggesting that contradiction might be strength. For the first time in their long lives, the perfect beings were beginning to doubt their own perfection. Fleet Commander Nixara had heard enough. She rose from her crystalline throne, her armor shifting to deep red with irritation. The small human had been speaking for over an hour about feelings and sacrifice and other meaningless concepts. It was time to end this charade. Enough primitive sentiment, she declared, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. We shall demonstrate why your species requires our guidance. She gestured with one clawed hand, and the air above them exploded into light. Mathematical formulas appeared in glowing symbols, floating and spinning in complex patterns. The equations were beautiful and terrible, filling the space with calculations that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own life. Do-hyun stared up at the display, his mouth falling open. The mathematics were unlike anything he had ever seen. They twisted through dimensions he could not imagine, using symbols that hurt his brain to look at directly. This was the work of minds that had been studying the universe for thousands of years. This theorem has challenged our greatest minds for 1,000 cycles, Nixara said with obvious pride. Our most brilliant scientists, our most advanced computers, our most sophisticated artificial intelligences have all attempted to solve it. None have succeeded. The other aliens nodded in agreement. Kuxvel activated another display showing the history of their attempts. Centuries of work by beings whose intelligence dwarfed humanity's greatest geniuses. Pages and pages of failed calculations, abandoned approaches, theoretical dead ends. Your advanced mathematics cannot even comprehend the question, Nixara continued, her mandibles clicking with amusement. This is why primitive species need guidance from their superiors. You lack the mental capacity for true understanding. Do-hyun continued staring at the floating equations, his heart sinking with each passing moment. She was right. Earth's mathematics were like children's finger paintings compared to this masterpiece. No human alive could even understand what the aliens were trying to solve, let alone actually solve it. But as he watched the symbols dance and flow above him, something sparked in his mind. Not about the mathematics themselves, but about something else entirely. About the way the aliens had approached the problem. "Give me 1 week," he said suddenly. The chamber fell silent. Every alien eye turned to stare at him in disbelief. "You cannot possibly," Nixara began, her voice filled with contempt. "1 week," Do-hyun repeated, his voice growing stronger. "If I fail, humanity accepts whatever fate you choose. If I succeed, you listen to what I have to say about our species." "This is absurd," Kixvel protested. "You admit your mathematics are primitive. How could you solve what we cannot?" "Maybe," Do-hyun said carefully. "We approach problems differently than you do. Maybe being primitive is not the same as being wrong." Nixara's armor shifted through several colors as she considered this. The human's confidence was either admirable courage or spectacular stupidity. Either way, it would be entertaining to watch him fail. "Very well," she said finally. 1 week. When you return empty-handed, your species will acknowledge our superiority." Back on Earth, Do-hyun did something that no Catalian had ever considered. Instead of locking himself in a laboratory with the smartest people he could find, he released the problem to everyone. He posted it on every university website, every online forum, every social media platform he could access. But he did not just share the mathematical formulas, he translated them into other forms. He worked with musicians to turn the equations into musical notation. He collaborated with artists to create visual representations. He even worked with poets to express the mathematical relationships in verse. "Professor, are you insane?" Hyena asked as she watched him upload the problem to a children's science website. "You're giving alien mathematics to kindergarten students?" "Why not?" Do-hyun replied, posting the visual version to an art school forum. "Maybe fresh eyes will see something we miss. Maybe someone who doesn't know it's impossible will find a solution." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Universities formed research teams. Online communities began collaborating across continents. Artists created sculptures based on the equations. Musicians composed symphonies inspired by the mathematical relationships. But the breakthrough came from unexpected places. A street artist in Busan was spray painting one of the visual representations on a wall when she stopped and tilted her head. "Hey," she posted online, "doesn't this part look like musical notation? Like if you turned it sideways?" A 10-year-old child in Daegu was working on the simplified version his teacher had shown the class when he raised his hand. "Why do the aliens think the answer has to be a number?" he asked. "What if it's something else?" A philosophy professor in Jeju was meditating on the problem when sudden understanding washed over her. She rushed to her computer and typed frantically, "What if the theorem isn't about finding truth? What if it's about understanding the beauty of searching for truth?" Slowly, piece by piece, the solution began to emerge. Not from any single brilliant mind, but from thousands of ordinary humans approaching the problem in ways no Catalian had ever imagined. Artists, children, philosophers, musicians, programmers, and dreamers, all contributing their small insights to something larger than any one person could achieve. When Do-hyun returned to the alien ship 1 week later, he brought not just an answer, but something unprecedented in Catalian history. A mathematical proof expressed through human creativity, chaos, and collaborative brilliance. A solution that was part science, part art, and completely, beautifully human. The aliens stared in stunned silence as their impossible theorem finally revealed its secrets, solved not by superior intelligence but by the primitive chaos they had dismissed so completely. The holographic display filled the chamber with impossible beauty. Mathematical formulas danced in the air like living things, their symbols glowing with soft light that seemed to pulse with heartbeat rhythm. But these were not the cold, perfect equations the Catalians knew. These formulas sang. Do-hyun stood, in the center of the chamber, his small human form dwarfed by the towering alien beings around him. In his hands he held a simple tablet computer that contained the work of millions of his fellow humans. The solution to their ancient problem was not written in any language the Catalians recognized, yet somehow it spoke to them in ways their own mathematics never had. "This is impossible," whispered Supreme Analyst Kixvel, its crystalline armor shifting through colors of confusion and wonder. "Our methods are pure, logical, efficient. We have worked on this theorem for 1,000 cycles. How did your chaotic approach succeed where our perfect order failed?" The other aliens leaned forward in their thrones, their large eyes fixed on the dancing equations. For beings who had lived for centuries, who had conquered space and time and bent the laws of physics to their will, this moment was unlike anything they had ever experienced. They were seeing their greatest failure transformed into unprecedented success by creatures they had dismissed as barely intelligent animals. Do-hyun smiled, remembering his grandmother's voice from years ago. She had always told him that the most beautiful things in life were the ones with flaws, with character, with the marks of human hands upon them. Perfect things, she said, had no soul. "Because we're not trying to be perfect," he said simply. "We're trying to be human. Our chaos isn't a flaw in our design, it's our greatest strength." He gestured to the holographic proof floating above them, its mathematical beauty enhanced by artistic elements that made no logical sense, but somehow felt absolutely right. "We fail constantly," he continued. "We fight with each other over everything. We contradict ourselves before we finish our sentences. And somehow, in all that beautiful mess, we find answers you never thought to look for." Fleet Commander Nixara's mandibles clicked in what might have been frustration or amazement. "But your wars, your conflicts, your endless disagreements, surely these are signs of inferior intelligence." "Our wars gave us democracy," Do-hyun replied calmly. "People fighting against kings and dictators until they learned to govern themselves. Our mistakes gave us science. Every failed experiment taught us something new about how the universe works." He pointed to one section of the holographic display where musical notation was woven into the mathematical formulas. "Our pain gave us art. The most beautiful music comes from the deepest suffering. The greatest paintings capture human struggle. Our differences gave us innovation. When people disagree, they create new solutions." The equations continued their dance above them, and Do-hyun could see understanding beginning to dawn in the aliens' perfect faces. They had created a question that was flawlessly logical, using methods that had been refined over millennia. But humans had found an answer that was perfectly, chaotically, beautifully human. "A street artist in Busan saw your mathematics as music," Do-hyun explained. "A child in Daegu asked why the answer had to be a number. A philosophy professor in Jeju realized that the search for truth was more important than the truth itself. None of them were trying to be smart. They were just being themselves." Kixvel stood slowly, its tall form casting strange shadows in the holographic light. "You mean to tell us that your solution came not from your greatest minds, but from ordinary individuals?" "Ordinary people doing extraordinary things," Do-hyun nodded. "A teacher who died saving children he didn't know. A nurse who worked in war zones. A musician who played for people who couldn't pay him. That's what makes us human. We don't solve problems because we're smart. We solve them because we care." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the mathematical display. The Catalians exchanged glances that lasted centuries in their perfect digital communication. When they finally spoke again, it was Nixara who broke the silence. "Perhaps," she said slowly, her voice carrying new tones that the translator struggled to interpret, "perhaps we have been too hasty in our judgment of your species." She leaned forward, her crystalline features reflecting something that had never been there before. Respect, wonder, and something that might have been hope. "Would humanity consider a partnership?" she asked. "We offer our technology, our knowledge, our accumulated wisdom of the stars. In return, you want to learn how to be beautifully imperfect." Do-hyun finished with a grin that lit up his tired face. And so began the most unlikely partnership in the history of the galaxy. The perfect beings and the chaotic ones, learning from each other in ways neither had imagined possible. As the first joint human Catalian research station was established, orbiting peacefully between Earth and its moon, Do-hyun thought about all the people whose stories had brought them to this moment. Minho, who died saving children, Nara, who healed strangers in war zones, Junho, who brought music to the darkest places. They had never known their simple acts of humanity would help save their entire species. But that was the most human thing of all, changing the universe, simply by being themselves one small act of imperfect love at a time. The stars had never seemed so bright or so full of possibility.